Welcome to Decoding Confidence. My name is Advita Patel, and I'm a confidence and influence coach and an award-winning communications consultant. This podcast is for you if you've ever been told that you need to be more confident in the workplace. I will be exploring the 7 core habits needed to be a more confident leader so you can help not only yourself thrive, but your team as well. I will be digging deep in all the episodes on advice, tactics, and techniques that can help you build self-esteem, self-belief, so you can achieve your goals and ambitions that you want. Enjoy this episode. Have you ever been in a conversation with somebody and listening to what they're saying and all you're thinking is, oh my goodness, every single word that's coming out of this person's mouth is really irritating me? Or have you ever had an email that's just grated on your last nerve? Or you've been in a meeting where people are talking and you just can't get a word in and they're really annoying you and frustrating you and you're just thinking to yourself, these are not my people. This isn't my community and I cannot engage with them. I certainly have, and my guess is that you have as well. So today's episode is all about a communication framework that changed how I communicate with other people, and it honestly transformed my life. This is going to sound quite dramatic, but it really did. And I want you to bear with me in this episode because I know lots of folks that I've spoken with previously have said to me that I hate being labeled. I don't like to be put in a box. I think it's really unfair when we do these things because it can make people think of us very differently. This isn't about putting labels on people, and it isn't about putting people in boxes either. This episode is going to help you understand how other people work. It's going to give you a flavor of how you may want to adjust and adapt your style, dial up and dial down different things to build relationships, to build connection, on understanding how you can influence and deliver with impact as well. So for a long time, I thought I was a pretty decent communicator. I mean, it's literally my job to communicate with other people. But then I started to notice a pattern that I just couldn't ignore in how I communicated. And it relates back to what I shared with you just a few minutes ago. Some conversations felt very effortless for me. Natural, the right words were being used at the right time. I felt I could talk to that person forever. We were going to become like best friends. And then there are other conversations with also smart and very well-meaning people that just felt like we were talking completely different languages. I'd feel frustrated, they'd feel frustrated, and neither one of us could even figure out why or explain why this situation was happening. And it wasn't until I read a book by a guy called Thomas Erikson. That's when it all started to click in for me in terms of why I was feeling the way I felt with certain individuals and in certain situations. So Thomas Erikson, if you haven't heard of him, he's the author of a book series called Surrounded By. And the book I read of his was called Surrounded by Idiots. And if you haven't read it, then I highly recommend that you do. I know the title sounds a bit iffy, but honestly, the book is actually a deeply compassionate look at why people behave the way they do overall. And Thomas's work also introduced me properly to the model that I'm going to talk about in this episode called DISC. I loved the book so much that I invited Thomas to be a keynote speaker at my Inner Rebel conference a couple of years ago. And it was on that day I started my journey in becoming a certified and qualified DISC trainer because I loved the framework so much. So if you didn't know, DISC was originally developed by Dr. William Moulton Marston back in 1928. And I loved this, which is why I talk about this isn't about labels or boxes, because Marston's original theory wasn't about labeling people or putting them in a box. It was genuinely understanding emotional expressions and behavior under pressure. It was about helping people understand themselves so they could work and communicate with other people who were different from them and connect with other people who are different from them as well. That is still the very heart of the theory today. And that's why I fell in love with this framework, because it isn't about labeling or boxing people, and it's how we use it to understand individuals. So let's break it down. DISC stands for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And in the modern versions of this framework, they're often represented by different colours. So red, yellow, green, and blue. You would have probably seen that, or you may have even undertaken a disc analysis yourself. I'm going to use both as I go through this episode because I find that colours make things a little bit easier for us to understand how different communication styles work. So first up is dominance, and that's red energy. So if you've got high red energy, you're often a communication person who wants clarity and speed. You're often quite decisive, you're direct, you're often results focused as well. You don't often want to wade through lots of context and you want to get to the point fast. So in a meeting, you're probably already 3 steps ahead of everybody else in the room. You lead with action and you communicate the same way as well. Then you've got influence, so yellow energy. So these influencers thrive generally on collaboration, connection, and also enthusiasm. That's their big thing. They're natural people-focused individuals. They're great storytellers and they bring energy into the room. If you feel that this is you, you will often feel that you want to be heard, you want to be part of the conversation, you want to feel warm and engaging as well. You will hate generally dry transactional communication. You'll find that cold and you'll find it dismissive as well. And then you've got steadiness, which is high green energy. High green energy folks value trust, consistency, and harmony. You tend to be thoughtful, loyal, and incredibly reliable generally. You don't love surprises or sudden change that doesn't have explanation attached to it. You build deep trust over time rather than quickly, and you're often the person in a team that people lean on. So the shoulder to cry on, a good listener, because you generally show up consistently without much drama surrounding you. So that's green energy, folks. And then we have, finally, blue energy, conscientious. So conscientious folks and communicators prefer logic, they prefer structure, and they love accuracy. They also like evidence. They want the detail, and they're the ones who will probably spot a number or an issue in a 40-page report. They communicate with precision generally, and they appreciate precision from other people as well. Now, you would have noticed that I've been using the word generally frequently in those descriptors. And the reason I say generally is because none of these are absolute. These are just high-level descriptions of how you may want to communicate depending on the environment that you're in. It isn't a given that a high blue energy person will love precision and accuracy. That may not be the case for certain individuals. So we have to be very considerate that these are not absolute. There's different circumstances and different environments will dictate how that person may show up, especially when they are under pressure. So I want to be very clear with that because that's where we can go wrong with labeling and putting people in boxes. Now, I've been in environments and in offices where people are actually referred to by their color. So somebody will go, oh, they're red energy or they're blue and they're behaving that way because they're yellow. That isn't, in my opinion, the best way to have these types of conversations. The reason DISC works so well, it gives us an understanding, and all of us have it within us to dial up and dial down depending on the situation. So I just wanted to make that very clear with you before I carry on. Now, what I want to tell you, and this is really important, is that none of these styles are better or worse than any other. Every single one has got incredible strengths, and every single one also has pressure points and hidden spots that we need to be aware of. Most of us have a dominant style and a secondary style, and we show up differently depending on the context and how much pressure we are under, as I said to you before. So for example, my own profile leans more towards influence and dominance, so yellow and red energy, which means that I'm naturally fairly enthusiastic and people-focused, But when I'm under pressure, I can move very quickly and I can also overlook detail. Knowing that has genuinely changed how I prepare for important conversations or important meetings. I now spend time slowing myself down deliberately, especially if I'm under pressure. I need more time for accuracy. I need to triple check the work that I'm doing. I need to have a second pair of eyes on my work as well, because I know that when I'm under stress and under pressure, I can move into that high red energy. And sometimes I can be quite direct and I can be quite cutting. That is something that I have learned about myself doing this work. So I'm very conscious of that, and I will spend my time and energy making sure that I've got contingencies in place to help me communicate better with people who may have a very different approach to me. So you've heard about DISC now, and you might be wondering, okay, Advita, that's great. It's great to know about all those colors and what they mean and all of that kind of jazz. But what does this actually have to do with confidence? Everything. It has everything to do with confidence. One of the biggest confidence killers in people is the inability to be able to communicate with different styles, different cultural contexts, different people with different lived experiences. So, for example, you may have given feedback that you thought was kind and balanced, and the person just shuts you down. Just like that, shuts you down. Or you may have walked out of a presentation feeling like you've absolutely nailed it, but then you get feedback to say that you missed the point. When communication doesn't go in the way we intended it to go, we almost always blame ourselves, and we start to spiral. And we start to wonder, what did we do wrong? What did I do wrong? Was it too much? Was it not enough? Did I come across arrogant? Did I come across too soft? Was I too sensitive? And then when we enter that spiral, it chips away at our confidence slowly, but really effectively. But what DISC teaches us is that a lot of the time, the communication didn't fail because of us. It failed because of a misunderstanding or a mismatch between the styles that you've had to communicate with. And once you understand that, you stop taking it as a personal failure, and your confidence starts to stabilize once you start understanding the different communication preferences in the room that you're in. So I want to share a story with you about a communications leader actually that I used to work with. And I'm going to call her Priya for the sake of this conversation. Priya was passed over for senior roles consistently and was told informally that she came across as a bit overwhelming in executive meetings. She was truly devastated when that was heard, because she spent years dialing herself down, trying to be quieter, trying to be more measured, which only led to her being somebody that she wasn't. So when we worked together and explored her DISC profile, it turned out that she was a very strong influencer. She had naturally high energy, she was naturally expressive, and she was also naturally enthusiastic. The feedback she received from her executive team wasn't about her being wrong. It was all about the clash of a blue executive team that she was presenting to. They wanted data up front, they wanted precision in language, and they wanted space to process what she was telling them. What Priya was doing in this situation was that she's leading with the story with lots of energy and lots of vision. Both are very valid and very valuable, but it was completely mismatched to the people that she was communicating to. So once Priya understood, two things happened for her. First thing was that she stopped shrinking. And she stopped trying to be less of herself, because she realized her trying to be somebody that she wasn't was knocking her confidence massively. Then she learned how to flex her style for that specific audience without, and this is important, losing who she was. So instead of leading with a story, she led with data first. She didn't change herself. She just reinvigorated how she shared the information that she needed to help the executive team sign off on whatever she needed them to sign off on. She did this, and within 6 months, she got her promotion. And what I want to make clear in this as well, and this is something that Thomas talks about in his book as well, and something I've spoken about in my book, Decoding Confidence, DISC isn't about changing who you are. It is about knowing how you dial up or dial down certain behaviors depending on what the situation calls for. And that's exactly what Priya did. She thought of it a bit like a volume dial. So you've got a natural resting level. That's your default style. But you've also got the capacity to turn things up, and you've also got the capacity to turn things down based on who you're with and what they need from you. That isn't inauthenticity, by the way. That's about working smart and being emotionally intelligent about what's required in that situation. That's what I would call empathy in action. So if you're presenting to a red energy dominant leader who wants speed and clarity, you may want to dial down the detail and share the headline and have evidence ready if they ask for it, but don't front load everything. Give them what they need to make a decision. So be bold, be brief, and be gone. If you're in a difficult conversation with someone, for example, who's got a high green energy, so a steady person who values trust and doesn't like sudden change, then you may want to dial down the pace. You may want to create space and you may not want to rush to the solution. Let that conversation with them breathe. That's really important with a high energy green. If you are onboarding a blue energy conscientious colleague and you're a natural yellow influencer, try to resist the urge to sell the vision before you've given them all the details. They will want to know about structure first. They will want to know what comes after the how and what that means for them. And here's one thing that I find particularly powerful if you are leading or you're trying to get people to understand your point of view. If you're in a room where you can see someone shutting down and going quiet or even becoming defensive, before you start assuming that they're just being difficult, just observe what you're seeing and ask yourself, what is their disc style? What could their disc style be? And whether your communication style may be the thing that's causing the friction. And this is where we need to tap into our active listening and our observation skills. And as a naturally high energy yellow, this is definitely something that I have had to work on. Now, I want to go somewhere that I don't think gets talked about enough in the DISC conversation, and that's power dynamics. The thing is, DISC can work really well in theory if everyone has an equal standing point or equal permission to flex as well. But in most organizations, that isn't the reality. Power shapes communication, and it always has. So if you're a junior HR professional who is leading with a high energy blue conscientious style, which means that you may be detail orientated, you may be thorough and cautious, but your line manager is a high energy red dominant, fast, decisive, and doesn't want to be slowed down. But when you present that detailed analysis, they wave it through in a couple of minutes and move on. It's likely that you're going to feel unseen and your confidence may take a hit. So if you are a leader that's got this kind of dominant red energy, that's something that you need to be conscious of. Or, and this is quite common as well, if you are a woman of color, you may be naturally warm, you may be relationship focused, you may be having an influencer style, so high energy yellow like myself. But the executive team, like in Priya's case, was dominated by blue, conscientious and red dominant styles. You try to flex and you may lead with data and you may tighten your language, but you're still being the one that's spoken over. That's when things can get a bit difficult for you because that power dynamic isn't allowing you to do what you need to do. And the power is doing the heavy lifting there. And that's something that DISC alone cannot fix. You cannot fix that. If that is a situation, you need to be able to understand that that isn't your job to fix. And I want to name this directly because I think it's really important. DISC is a tool and it's a brilliant tool, but it isn't the cure for structural inequality or bias. And when we tell people who are from underrepresented or marginalized groups to simply adapt their style without acknowledging that the system itself may be the problem, then we may be putting the burden in the wrong place. And I really want you to take that on board, what I'm sharing with you, because DISC can't fix everything. But what DISC can do, and this is still significant, it can give you the right language and it can give you a framework to understand what's happening in a room. And it can help you make things intentional as well by making those intentional choices about when and how you flex and how to recognize when you're not being heard because of style mismatch versus when something else is at play. And if you are a leader who's listening to this, DISC is a real valuable lens for you to examine your own power and how you might be inadvertently making it harder for people with different styles to show up confidently. So think about who in your team are you accidentally shutting down because their style or communication style doesn't match yours. And really reflect on that, because when you start listening and paying attention, you'll start spotting where you may be inadvertently ignoring somebody or excluding them from conversations. So how do we actually use this to build confidence in ourselves and the people around us? The first thing I always recommend is getting curious about your own profile. So if you've never done a DISC assessment, then it's definitely worth doing. And I offer DISC assessments. I'm going to put it in the show notes so you can click on that link if you want to undertake your assessment. It isn't about boxing yourself in, like I said, but it is about getting a true reflection of your default style and your pressure points. So things like, what do you do under stress? Where do you overdo things? Where do you undershoot yourself? Where is that self-awareness that will help you build more confidence in how you communicate with others? So the second thing I advise is to start reading the room a bit differently than what you may be doing today. So that active listening thing that I spoke to you about earlier. So before any important conversation, so things like if you have to give difficult feedback to somebody, or you have to present at a senior management meeting, or you're involved in a negotiation, think about that person's likely style. Are they someone who leads with high red energy? So you may need to get to the point quicker. Are they somebody who's got green energy about them, so they need time and a bit more warmth? Or are they someone that's got blue energy? So that means that they might need evidence in order to be able to make a decision. And the third thing is specifically for people who manage others. If you're a people manager, this is important for you because I want you to consider how DISC shows up in how you empower decisions. So in my book, I write about infinity bias. So how we may unconsciously stretch the people who communicate like us and potentially overlook the people whose style feels unfamiliar. So if you're a high energy red dominant leader, you might find yourself consistently giving stretch opportunities to the person who communicates with speed and directness, someone like you, ultimately, because it feels like confidence to you. But if you've got a thoughtful, conscientious blue in your team who documents everything and asks the right questions and might be just as capable as that dominant red, but shows up differently, you may not think that they've got the speed or the authority potentially to do a good job for you. So just be conscientious of how you're making those decisions. And finally, use DISC to reframe what you're seeing. So next time someone's frustrating you in a meeting or a piece of communication comes into your inbox and you react to it, ask yourself, what could their DISC style be? Is this difficult behavior or is it just different behavior? And when you adjust your interpretation of what's happening around you, it's not about lowering your standards or changing yourself or accepting like nonsense coming your way, but it is about understanding people a bit more accurately. And it's genuinely one of the most confident things you can do to build and boost your self-esteem because it helps you get out that spiral of self-blame and into practice of intentional communication. So you kind of distance yourself from it's all about me, and instead you're talking about the intention behind what's happening. So I've shared a lot with you in this episode. I want to bring it all together for you. Remember, DISC is not a personality test. It's not a box and it's not a label. It's a framework for understanding how people prefer to communicate, how they prefer to process information, and how they like to show up, and how all of that can change under pressure. And when you understand that properly, you ultimately stop misreading situations as personal failures and start seeing them as communication puzzles, for example, that you may be able to solve. Confidence generally grows when you understand yourself and you trust yourself. It grows when you also understand other people, and it also grows when you stop wondering why it didn't go the way you intended it to go, and you start making intentional choices about how you show up for different people in different situations and in different power dynamics. So it's not about people being difficult, it's that people can be different. Thomas Erikson writes about this in Surrounded by Idiots, and it's a brilliant starting point if you want to go deeper on the 4 types. I really hope this episode resonated with you, and if it did and you found it interesting and you think somebody else might find it interesting as well, please do forward the episode onto them. Word of mouth is the best way for podcasts like mine to grow. Next week, I'll be coming back and talking about cultural intelligence, but if you found this episode interesting and informative, like I said, and you want to find out a bit more about your own DISC assessment, or you want me to come and do a DISC workshop for your team, then DM me, email me, whatever your preference is. Everything is in the show notes. You can email me at advita@decodingconfidence.com, or you can send me a DM on LinkedIn as well. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time. Keep on decoding your confidence.